Καλησπέρα σε όλους σας. Καλό μήνα. Χαίρομαι πολύ που είμαι εδώ σήμερα και μου αρέσει πάρα πολύ και ο χορός που είδαμε προηγουμένως. Και ο χορός μου αρέσει ιδιαιτέρως γιατί έχει αυτό που λένε ο κύκλος του χορευτή. Ο κύκλος του χορευτή τι είναι? Εσύ είσαι μέσα στον κύκλο και νιώθεις πολύ safe, είναι μια safe area, όπου δεν μπορεί να σε πειράξει κανείς, εσύ νιώθεις ασφαλής, αλλά μπορείς να επικοινωνήσεις και πολύ καλά με τους άλλους. Και αυτό για το χορό το βρίσκω εξαιρετικό. Αν ρωτήσετε τους χορευτές, το ξέρουν αυτό. Και αυτό μπορείς να το μεταφέρεις και στη ζωή. Καλησπέρα για άλλη μια φορά. Είμαι η Κατερίνα. Είμαι δημοσιογράφος και ραδιοφωνική παραγωγός τα τελευταία 17 χρόνια. Ειλικρινά χαίρομαι που είμαι εδώ, γιατί άκουσα σημαντικούς ανθρώπους και γιατί πάνω απ' όλα αυτό περνάει και σε μένα και σε όλους σας. Στο ραδιόφωνο έχουμε ένα μότο που λέμε «You can't win the morning battle in the morning». Δεν μπορείς να κερδίσεις τη μάχη του πρωινού το πρωί. Εγώ θα ήθελα λίγο να το παραφράσω και να πω το ίδιο για τη ζωή. «You can't win life without living». Δεν μπορείς να ζήσεις τη ζωή χωρίς να ζεις. Και είναι το πιο σημαντικό απ' όλα, το να ζεις τη ζωή. Όταν ήμουν μικρή, μου λέγανε διάφοροι τι πρέπει να κάνω με τη ζωή μου, πώς πρέπει να φέρομαι, τι επαγγελματική κατάρτιση πρέπει να έχω. Εγώ πάντα, λοιπόν, σε αυτά τα πρέπει, έκανα ακριβώς αυτό που δεν πρέπει για αυτούς, αλλά αυτό που πρέπει για μένα. Έχω την εντύπωση ότι κάτι έκανα καλό. Υπήρχαν πάντα, βέβαια, οι φωνές γύρω μου, και λέω φωνές γιατί ήταν οι φωνές των άλλων και οι φωνές οι δικές μου. Οι δικές μου ίσως να ήταν λίγο πιο δυνατές, και αυτό ήταν το ευχάριστο της υπόθεσης, χωρίς να νομίζω ότι είμαι η Ζαν Ντάρκ. Ευτυχώς. Και αυτό τι έκανε? Με έκανε να μπορώ να φιλτράρω το τι συμβαίνει γύρω μου και να μπορώ να κρατώ την αρχική μου απόφαση και την αρχική μου θέση. Ακόμα και όταν το σύμπαν γύρω μου κατέρεε και πίστευε ακριβώς το ανάποδο. Κατέληξα μετά από όλα αυτά ότι η αγάπη, η εστίαση και η αφοσίωση σε αυτό που πραγματικά θέλεις και αγαπάς μπορεί να σε κάνει να διονύζεσαι τα πράγματα και να μένεις εδώ και να πολεμάς, αλλά και να υπάρχεις. Γιατί το να υπάρχεις είναι το πιο σημαντικό απ' όλα. Γι' αυτό είμαστε εδώ, γιατί υπάρχουμε και γιατί είναι οι άνθρωποι οι οποίοι πολλές φορές μας καθοδηγούν. Δηλαδή υπάρχουν φορές που νιώθεις μια δυσκολία, κάτι, και πρέπει οπωσδήποτε κάποιος να σου δώσει ένα έναυσμα, μια αρχή. Οι φωνές αυτές υπάρχουν ακόμα γύρω μου, αλλά πιστέψτε με, όταν πρόκειται για αυτή του Σον Σμιθ, θεωρώ πραγματικά ότι είμαι σε πάρα πολύ καλό δρόμο. Θα βάλω λίγο τα γυαλιά μου, διότι ούγαρε έρχεται μόνον, θα μου το επιτρέψετε αυτό. Όταν ήταν μόλις 13 ετών, ο γείτονάς του τον χτύπησε με το αυτοκίνητο και τον εγκατέλειψε στον τόπο του ατυχήματος. Αυτό δίδαξε τον Σον ότι κανένας από εμάς, όποιες και αν είναι οι περιστάσεις, δεν έχει εγγυημένη την επόμενή του αναπνοή. Ορκίστηκε στον εαυτό του ότι θα ζούσε μία ζωή για την οποία θα μπορούσε να είναι υπερήφανος. Σήμερα ο Σον είναι ένας πιστοποιημένος life coach, πρόεδρος της δικής του εταιρείας σεμιναρίων κατάρτισης και δημιουργός περισσότερων από 100 audio προγραμμάτων όλων των ειδών προσωπικής ανάπτυξης. Έχει πελάτες σε όλο τον κόσμο και είναι διακεκριμένος ομιλητής. Η αποστολή του Σον είναι να υποστηρίζει όσους να ζουν τη ζωή τους γεμάτη πάθος, σκοπό και παρουσία. Και το υποστηρίζει αυτό, φαντάζομαι, για όλους μας και γι' αυτό είμαστε εδώ. Το βιβλίο ασκήσεων το έχετε μπροστά σας. Θα τεθούν ερωτήσεις και στο Σον σε λίγο, αλλά πάνω απ' όλα πρέπει να τον υποδεχθούμε. Και θέλω το πιο θερμό σας χειροκρότημα για τον Σον Σμιθ που είναι απόψε εδώ μαζί μας. Hi.
Good afternoon. How are we feeling? Better Life Day, that's it? I came from America, West Coast. How are we feeling? Can I get just a little bit more? That was a long flight. Now, first of all, I want to say that I really honor you, because there's all kinds of things that you could be doing, but you chose to be here, and you chose to go for a better life, yeah? So I really want to honor you for making that decision. And let me tell you, I learned everything I ever needed to know about relationships in one incident when I was 5 years old. 5 years old. So it's time for me to go to kindergarten, and I tell my mom I don't want to go to school. So I gave her an opportunity to allow me to stay home from school. And she said no. And I said, but I don't want to go. And she said, "You're going, get in the car." And I go, "I don't want it." And I start running, right? And she scoops me up. Any of you have 5-year-olds or had a 5-year-old? Have you ever seen a 5-year-old? So we know what kind of animal we're talking about, right? So she scoops me up and throws me in the car. And the first thing I did was I got right behind her seat, because I knew that she could reach me over there, but she couldn't get me behind her seat, right? So as she's driving, I'm kicking and screaming, "I don't want to go to school, I don't want to go to school." And I'm just kicking the back of her seat, and she's just driving, right? And after a few minutes, you know, she was still going. She hadn't turned around. And so I got quiet. And she thought that I had fallen asleep, because I used to always cry myself to sleep. So she figured, you know, I had fallen asleep. And so she gets to the school, gets in the parking lot, parks, goes around the back, and is expecting to see a little sleeping boy. But she opens the door and she sees me like this. Completely naked. She thought I was going to sleep. I was taking my clothes off, because I figured she's not taking me to school if I got no clothes on, right? So I just kicked it up a notch. And then we had this moment, you know. Have any of you ever seen like a country western movie where there was like a battle and they're getting ready, there's a little duel, right? It's like we're looking at each other's eyes like, right? We're ready there, just ready to draw our guns. And I had a kind of a different kind of gun. But wait for it, it'll hit. I couldn't do much with that, I was only 5. But so we're ready, and right before the person makes a move, if you ever notice in movies, their eyes get big. Have you ever noticed that? So we're both just staring at each other, and then her eyes go, and she goes in for me, right? And then I'm kicking and screaming. I mean, could you imagine seeing this? Like my mom reaching in, and I'm all naked and kicking and screaming, and blah, blah, blah. Now, whether I went to school or not that day depends on who you ask. She'll tell you I went to school, but my ego won't allow that answer, right? So if it's up to me, I didn't go to school. But I learned everything I needed to know about relationships in that incident. If you want really positive, healthy relationships, what do you need to do? Get naked. Like, I don't know, people talk about my feelings. Like, just get naked. I'm like, that's it, you know? I think I'm done, actually. Should I keep going, or let's get naked? Actually, there is a different point to that story. It's slightly more profound, and I'll tell you later, or maybe you'll get it throughout the whole course of this talk. But a little bit later in life, when I was maybe in middle school, I had a mentor tell me that 90% of my happiness was going to be determined by who I chose to marry. 90% of my happiness. And I don't know why, but I just really held on to that. And I figured, this is a choice, and I want to be happy. So I really wanted to hold out, right? I wanted to make a wise choice. So throughout the whole course of my childhood, and really my whole life, I had 2 girlfriends. What, was that a sympathy? Like, oh. Thank you, I appreciate that. I had 2 girlfriends. One of them lasted about 3 days before I realized she wasn't the one. And the other one's up there, I married her. And in 2 weeks, we have our 15th wedding anniversary. And where else to spend it than in Greece, yeah? And I'll tell you what, you know, that 90% number, it might actually be low. Might actually be low. Because if you have a really solid core relationship, your whole world can be falling around you, falling down around you, but you've still got something really solid to stand on. But if you don't have that solidness inside, you can have all the success and all the money and all the things outside, but you still don't have that solid thing to stand on. Does that make sense? So this is something that is so critical, because if you get everything you want in life but never have these core relationships, what's the point, right? So I want to teach you today everything I can in the short amount of time that I have about how to create enriched, connected, truly fulfilling relationships in your life. And I only have 40 minutes, so I'm going to get through as much as I can. But, you know, we can't solve all the world's problems in these 40 minutes. So one of the standing offers for you is if you put your name and email address on my sheet of paper out there, I'll give you everything I have on relationships. It's probably 5 or 6 more hours worth of stuff if you want. And all you got to do is just tell me that you want it, and I'll send it off to you, okay? All right, so we're going to talk about enriched relationships. I have the time. There's 6 steps to create enriched relationships. And I say overnight, not that it's really going to happen overnight, but it can be very, very quick. And some of these shifts you're going to be able to implement right away. How many of you are in a relationship right now that you want to stay in? I probably should have qualified that. And if they're with you, keep your hand up, right? How many of you are not in a relationship, but you want to be in a relationship? Cool. Guess where one of the best places is to find relationships? People that want more, people that want a better life. Look around. Those of you that just put your hands up, look around. So there's 6 steps in my opinion. And I want to start with the way that most people think about relationships and the way most people do relationships. Most relationships look something like this. You know, I don't know if this is sort of an icon out here in Greece. In America, this is kind of an icon of relationships. And it's 2 interlocking wedding rings. Right? And that's what we think love is. Have any of you ever seen that before? You know, we think that's great because we're interlocked, you know, and we're really strong that way. And in America, there's a really famous movie. Any of you seen the movie Jerry Maguire? Jerry Maguire. There's a real famous scene where he's trying to get his girl back. And one of the lines that he says, do you remember anybody remember what he says? You complete me. He says, you complete me. Well, listen, I need to apologize on behalf of my country because that's everything that's wrong in relationships, in my opinion. We should not be looking for somebody to complete us because I don't believe that you need to be completed. Right? Does that make sense? So here's the way it usually looks. 2 people get together, and there's that overlap, right? And that's where the relationship is, right there in the overlap. But the problem is, that's where all this stuff comes from. That's where all the irritations are as well, that overlap, right? Any of you ever feel like your partner is kind of stepping on your toes a little bit? You want some space, you know? This is where so many of the arguments happen because of that overlap. My wife and I have never argued. We've been together 18 years. We never argued. Most of the time when I say that, people, you know, whether they use profanity or not, depends on where I'm talking, but they basically say that's absolutely not true. But only the people that argue tell me that's not true. And I just have always had a philosophy that you can't put me into an argument because it always requires 2 people. So what if you just decided, I'm just not going to argue. I mean, what's the point? I've just never known, here's the thing. I've never known anger to solve any problem. Have you? So then why choose it? You know, why choose it? And we just both really believe that. This is where expectations live as well. And this is one of the big issues with relationships, is when you expect the other person to make you happy. You expect them to like the things that you like. You expect them to complete you. And guess where all disappointment comes from? Unmet expectations. That's where all disappointment comes from. If you don't have another expectation on another person, you can't ever be disappointed again. Think about that for a second. If you remove your expectations off anybody else, you cannot be disappointed. How many of you would like to wipe disappointment out of your entire life? Don't expect anything from other people. It's huge in relationships. This is where resentments show up, especially after the expectations are unmet. Then you start to resent people. Resentment is such a nasty, nasty emotion and state. And it definitely doesn't belong in empowered relationships, right? So here's what I believe to be true, that it's not about finding somebody to complete you, because you're not broken. If you take the relationship away, look at what we have. We have two unwhole people. And neither one of them has all of themselves to give to the other. Is this making sense? And each of those people are usually expecting the other one to fill them up. It's easy to expect your partner to make you feel good. Right? How many of you would like your partner to make you feel good? There's nothing wrong with liking them to make you feel good, but that's not their job. That's not what they are here to do for you, is to raise your self-esteem. There's a reason it's called self-esteem. It's your responsibility. Self-esteem, right? So relationships are absolutely going to make you feel good, but that's not the point of them. Are you guys following me on this? It's kind of controversial because most people want that, you complete me romantic movie. But that's not the way to live a clean relationship. So here's what I think enriched relationships look like. Instead of the overlap, an enriched relationship just touches. And you see how each person is whole and complete? And if you notice, isn't there a lot more color now in each circle and together? There's a lot more richness to share because it's not their responsibility to make you anything. So on your sheet, actually, I should have told you this. On your sheet, in my section in the worksheet, I want you to draw this picture where it says, enriched relationships look like this. Draw these two little circles. Draw them up high a little bit. Because when you have this healthy relationship between two people who are touching, now you've got room for the relationship. There's the relationship. Do you see that? And I think too many people don't work on their relationship because they're too busy fighting in the overlap. Does anybody recognize what that looks like, by the way? Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse. So we actually call this the Mickey Mouse model of marriage. Because all three things are whole now and complete. Are you with me? It is so much cleaner. I promise you. It is so much cleaner. But you have to be willing to know what you want. You have to be willing to say, this is who I want to touch. And this is the relationship that I want to have. Carol started the day out teaching us that whatever you really focus on is what you're going to find, and it's what's going to expand, right? What I find is that if you ask most people what they want in a relationship, they'll tell you everything they don't want, based on all of the bad relationships in the past, right? Well, I don't want that guy, and I don't want him to do this, and I don't want him to do that. But most people aren't crystal clear about what they do want. So I want to do a little exercise here. And for those of you that are in a relationship, you'll do this a little bit differently than those of you that are finding a relationship. Now, you can talk to either one. It doesn't matter. So you can mix in with somebody who already has a relationship. But it's going to be just a slightly different question. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to stand, and I want you to walk around, and I want you to claim the relationship that you're going to fight for. You claim the relationship that you're going to wait for. Claim the relationship that you're going to attract into your life. Because if you don't have that kind of clarity, it might go right under your nose and you won't even see it. Or you might get yourself out of a good relationship because you don't recognize it when it's there. And so many people in their relationships are too guarded because they don't want to get hurt. But if you spend your whole life guarding yourself like this so you don't get hurt, guess what happens? You don't get loved either. You know, if you try to keep all the bad guys out, you don't let the good guys in either. So the first step is getting really crystal clear. So I'm going to give you just like a minute and a half. It's not going to be, you know, a long time, and I don't want you to sympathize with them and, oh, and I want one of those too, right? We can do that later. But for now, I just want you to walk around and maybe just talk with 2 or 3 people. And I want it to be really quick. And I want you, for those of you that are not in a relationship, I want you to say, what I am committed to finding is a relationship that looks like this, this, this. Does that make sense so far? I'm committed to finding a relationship that looks like this. Right? Most people are interested in relationships. I want you to be committed first to the relationship. If you're already in a relationship, I just want you to slightly tweak it. And I want you to say, I'm committed to creating more blah, blah, blah in my relationship. Do you see the difference? Those of you that are looking for one, I'm committed to finding this kind of relationship. Those of you that are in one, I'm committed to creating more of this in the relationship. Now, those of you that are listening, you have a task. The task is, if they are vague, if they're not crystal clear, challenge them on it. Just ask them, what does that mean? This might change your life by somebody asking you, what does it mean when you say somebody who loves me? What does it mean? A couple days ago when we were over at the Public, my wife and I were talking to somebody, and she said, I want somebody who's kind. My wife said, what does that mean? Does that mean he opens doors for you? Does that mean he listens to you? Does that mean he picks little puppies up off the street and brings them home? Those are all kindness, right? So what does it actually mean? What quality specifically are you committed to attract? Everybody, does that make sense? Okay, I'll give you like 2 minutes. So go ahead and stand. Go ahead and stand. On your feet. We got to move around some of that food that we just had, right? So you have about 2 minutes. Just go around and say, this is what I'm committed to. Go. Thank you for the timer. What's that? Oh, sure. Yeah. What are you committed to? $15 more seconds, so you can wrap that up. 15 seconds. All right, stop. Sean's hand rule is still in effect. Okay, thank you. So go ahead and make your way back to your seats. So I'm curious, did any of you get a little more clear on what you want in a relationship or in your relationship than maybe you were before? Just in a couple minutes, just by asking, what does that actually mean? Because if you don't tell your mind exactly what you're looking for, and you're just too vague, then you never know what you're going to end up with. And if relationships account for 90% of your happiness, how many of you are willing to hold out until you find the relationship that you really want? Or how many of you are willing to create the relationship that you want if you're already in one? Raise your hand if you're willing to commit to that. That's the first step. See, too often in life, we only commit when we know we're going to get something. But the commitment comes first. That goes for everything. You commit first. Then you'll find it. Then the universe will send it your way. Now, those of you who are in a relationship, actually this stands for both. If you want something more in a relationship, guess what the secret is? You put it in there. If you're looking to attract somebody into your life and you want an enriched relationship, become the person you're wanting to attract. Become that person. Because then you'll set that magnet out and it will attract that thing that you're committed to. But you've got to commit first. Is everybody with me? Cool. All right. So let's go through these 6 steps. And these are in your book, so you can write them down if you want. And they all spell enriched. And the first E, I've already touched on this a little bit. Eliminate your expectations. Expectations be gone. Eliminate them. Turn to somebody right now, right next to you, and say, it's not your partner's job to make you whole. Tell them that. It's not your partner's job to make you whole. Because self-esteem is whose responsibility? Yours. That's why it's called self-esteem. So eliminate your expectations. Now, a lot of people have challenges with this, and just like we've been doing so far, we'll have a Q&A session in a little bit. We'll answer some of the questions. How many of you have read the book or you're familiar with the 5 love languages? Okay, there's a book, and I don't have the time to teach it all. I don't want to. Get the book or go to the internet. It's called the 5 love languages. You could just search for the 5 love languages on Google and you'll find it. It's by a guy named Dr. Gary Chapman. I think Gary Chapman. And he teaches that we all have 5 different languages. And what it means is this is how we want to feel love and this is how we express love. I'll just briefly tell them to you. I don't want this to, I don't want you to think that this is actually, part of the content. I'm not going to explain it all. But you have quality time. You have words of affirmation, you saying, oh, you look so pretty, you look so beautiful. You have acts of service when you do things for people. You have nurturing touch. And you have, what's the other one? Gifts. So you give things to people. And when you learn your partner's love language, it's like a different dialect. So sometimes you might be expressing your love or appreciation to your partner, but that's not the way they want it. So they don't receive it the same. And most of the time, we get into relationships with people who have different languages than us. It's literally like trying to speak two different languages that neither one of you understand. So when you learn your partner's love language, it'll be so much easier to create that connection, because you'll do things for him or her that she wants, and she'll receive it better. Does that make sense? So read the book, go online. It'll change all your relationships. It's amazing, amazing work. The N stands for nurture their needs. Nurture their needs. That does not mean fulfill their needs. It's okay if your partner has a need that you can't or don't want to fill. And it's okay if your partner has a need, or if you have a need that your partner doesn't want to fulfill or can't fulfill. But if you expect your partner to fulfill all of your needs, you're in trouble. Because it won't happen. Does that make sense? So like, for me, for instance, I just got knee surgery a few months ago because I have to play basketball again. I haven't played basketball in so long. I feel alive when I play basketball. And Sybil is so supportive of me going out and play basketball, even if it's 2 hours away. A lot of people are like, you can't go spend 2 hours on the things that you love, or don't go out with the guys, or don't go out with the girls. But you know what? If that's important for them to feel whole, you should support that. Because the more whole and happy they are, the more whole and happy you are, and the better your relationship is. Are you following me? So allow them to have those needs. This is really crucial. Plan time, especially, how many of you have kids? Okay? Plan time together. Keep the flames going in your relationship. You've got to plan time together. But you've also got to plan time apart for what I just said. Make sure that each person feels whole and complete. How are we doing, everybody? Are you with me? Cool. All right. The R in enrich your relationships. And this is the one that a lot of people really struggle with, because we don't want to do this a lot of times. The first one is respect, but the second one is really what I'm talking about. Responsibility. Responsibility. And again, it's a personal responsibility, because self-esteem is whose responsibility? Yours. Now, a lot of times we think about relationships as being 50-50. Have you ever heard of that? It's a 50-50 relationship. Absolutely not. It's 100-100. You're both 100% responsible for your experience in the relationship. Those are the whole circles that just touch. There's 100% responsibility on both of you if you want a clean and healthy relationship. If you want to fight, and if you want to hold grudges, and if you want to hold resentments and stuff, then don't pay attention to anything that I say. Because that's the formula. I thought that joke was going to, that was so much funnier in my head. Man. Note to self, don't use that one in Greece. So it's all about taking personal responsibility, right? And here's a great, a common thought that we have a lot, is you treat others the way you want to be treated. Have you heard that before? Well, I think we should take it a step further, and we treat others the way they want to be treated. Because what if they don't want to be treated the same way you want to be treated? Right? And that goes into the love languages that we talked about before. So, and here's a key point. Throughout this whole thread is just simply communicating. Communication is what causes relationships to fall. We got to communicate. Right? All right. The I in enrich. Every time I do this, I want to say each one of them, oh, this is my favorite. This is the most important one. They're all the most important one to me. And this one actually is about importance. Importance is imperative. Importance is a must. Importance. Both ways. Doing the things that make you feel important, but also doing the things that make the other person feel important as best you can. And doing the things that make the relationship feel important. Let me give you the 5 ways to make somebody feel important. See, I believe each and every one of us are walking around this planet searching for 5 things to make us feel important. And it starts when we're really young as kids, and we're all just big kids, right? So we're still looking for these things. And the first one is acknowledgement. Especially when relationships are long-term, it's so easy to stop acknowledging the other person. Any of you in a long-term relationship, can you agree with that? It's just easy to stop acknowledging them. You know, we take stuff for granted. But I'll tell you, there's something so powerful if you just say, you know what, sweetheart? I noticed that you did the dishes. Thanks. Little things. It doesn't even have to be some deeply moving emotional conversation. Just acknowledgement. I acknowledge that. Thank you. So I want you to think of one thing, if you're in a relationship, think of one thing you can acknowledge your partner for that you haven't yet. And I want you to go home and do that. How many of you are willing to do that? Just go home and acknowledge them for something that has gone unacknowledged for a long time. Awesome. The next one, affection. I think that's, pretty self-explanatory in relationships. Just be there. Be affectionate with them. The third one is appreciation. Acknowledgement doesn't always mean appreciation, but they can go hand in hand. So you can say, sweetheart, thank you for doing the dishes. I really appreciate when you step up when I'm really busy and you step in and you do some of the chores. That makes me feel really important, and I appreciate you for that. Do you see how that's one step further than just, I noticed you did the dishes? Appreciation. I mean, that'll speak right to your heart. So appreciate somebody. The fourth one is acceptance. Oh, this is a good one. How many of you have ever been in an argument in a relationship before? Oh, my hand wasn't up, actually. It shouldn't have been up. When you're in an argument, if you become aware of what's happening right now, here's what's happening. You're both wishing the other person was different. In that moment, you are wishing and expecting they were different. Does that make sense? You're expecting them to have a different opinion than you are right now. That's why you're willing to fight for it. You're expecting them to have done something different. Guess what happens when you expect people to be different than they are? You get disappointed. So accept fully who your partner is and what you have in your relationship. Now, this does not mean don't try to change it. But see, I believe that you cannot change anything that you haven't first accepted. So if you're not really fully happy in your relationships, accept where you are now and then take one step forward. But if you don't accept him or her for who they are, you can't make any movement in the relationship. All you can do is look over there and get irritated that they're not who you expect them to be. Is that making sense? So fully accept them. And the last one here is attention. Again, just pay them attention. How many of you can see how simple these 5 things are? If you committed to these 5 things in all of your relationships, virtually all your problems would go away. Do you know that it's basically impossible to be angry and holding on to these 5 things at the same time? They just don't exist together. So choose to hold on to this stuff instead of choosing anger or irritation. Any of you willing to do that? Your relationship shift overnight. The C. You still with me? We're good? The C. Oh, this is a tough one sometimes for people. Conscious conversations. Have any of you ever had a conversation that you know you needed to have, but that was why you didn't want to have it? Right? It's like what Sean was talking about. You know, that discomfort. you have to have those conversations if you're committed to a healthy relationship. And here's the cool thing. When you have those conscious conversations and you tell your partner, listen, this is what I'm feeling when this happens, there's a space that gets created, and that conversation will always bring you closer. See, most people are afraid of having these conversations because they think that it's going to pull you apart. It'll actually draw you closer if you're willing to have the conversations that must be had in order to create the relationship that you want. Now, with conversation, this is a much deeper piece with language. But I've had people tell me that this right here saved their marriage. That there are two types of communication. There's literal communication. And a literal communicator, let's say if I was thirsty and I wanted you to give me a glass of water, I would say, I'm thirsty. Will you give me a glass of water? That's a literal communicator, right? The other kind of communicator is an implied communicator. Guess what they say? I sure am thirsty. Why are you not going to get me water? Right? Now again, we will usually attract the opposite. Neither one is right or wrong. You just have to be aware. If you're in a relationship with an implied communicator, you got to move toward that way a little bit, or have one of those conscious conversations. Says, listen, if you just say, because I'm a totally literal communicator. If somebody says, you know, hey, I'm really thirsty, my response is, I'm not. Like, I just thought we were sharing, right? I'm not, you know. So be really clear in your conversation. And finally, here the H. This is my favorite one, tied with all the other ones. I mean, I think what's the point of having a relationship if it doesn't make you happy? You know, you got to honor that happiness. You got to really truly honor and fight for and be committed to the happiness in a relationship. And this is one of my favorite questions. Have you heard this question? Would you rather be right, or would you rather be happy? And usually when we're in an argument, what are we fighting about? Who's right and who's wrong? That doesn't lead to happy. So if you'd rather be happy, then act like it. And I know Martin's going to go even deeper into this later, because this is so key in so many areas of your life. And finally, you know, pre-decide every day that you can be joyful. My dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer about 2.5 years ago. And when we told everybody that he had cancer, people were telling me how awful it was going to be. You know, people were saying, oh, my mom had cancer, my grandma had cancer, it's going to be so difficult, you're going to have to do all these things, it's going to be so hard. And you know, I was like, you know what, screw that. This is my dad's final chapter. Why does it have to be miserable? And so Sybil and I were talking one time, and I said, what if we just pre-decided that it was going to be beautiful? Which is a weird word to put on cancer. But I made it a point. I just said, you know what? This is going to be beautiful. And guess what happened? Guess what I saw through my eyes? Everything that was beautiful. Where's the beauty in this? So what if you just pre-decided every day that you were going to live in joy? It didn't matter if there was a parking space open at work. It didn't matter if you had a job. It didn't matter if you woke up and you had a little bit of pain in your body. Those things should not determine your happiness. Your happiness should come first. And guess what? Then all those other things get better in your life if you just decide to be happy anyway. Are you following me? Pre-decide to be happy. So I want to do a real short. Actually, let's do questions now, and if we have time, I'll do another exercise. So, Katerina, are you ready for questions? Okay, actually 2 minutes. So I'll do a little exercise. What I want you to do is I want you to turn to a partner that's right next to you, so you don't have to get up and go around. Turn to a partner that's right next to you, and we're just going to do a simple communication exercise, right? So right now, go ahead and turn to them. Look at them in the face. And if for those of you that are not in a relationship, maybe you look at them a little differently. But keep it in their eyes, right? Keep eye level. And here's what I want you to do. With no talking, I want you to just look at that person, and I want you to see them for these 5 words. I want you to see that we're all looking for acknowledgement and affection and appreciation and acceptance and attention. So just look at them in their eyes and just see that they want this stuff. Just see. Don't say anything. Just notice it. Just notice it. Okay, now you can turn back to me. Just notice the humanity. Notice the person. And now what I want you to do is, without any words whatsoever, with no words, how would you communicate to them these 5 words? Without any words whatsoever, go ahead and turn to your partner and communicate these 5 words with no sound. What would that feel like? No sound, no sound. Oh, I saw a kiss back there. Nice. You guys know each other? Just met, even better, yes. Awesome. So how many of you could feel that when you have this sense, you want to give this energy to somebody, how many of you could feel you just kind of drop in your heart a little bit? Can you feel that? If you live your life that way, your relationships will be so rich. And you won't have to worry about not getting angry and not having resentments, because you're just living in the richness of everything that is. You won't have to try to fend off all that other stuff. So, Katarina is ready. You got some questions?
Ωραία, είμαστε έτοιμοι. Όποιος θέλει να κάνει ερώτηση στο Σον, παρακαλώ πολύ τα χέρια σας και μπορείτε να το ρωτήσετε ό,τι θέλετε σχετικά με τις σχέσεις, αλλά ερωτήσεις περισσότερο. Σας ακούμε. Ορίστε. Το όνομά σας. Μισό λεπτό να έρθει και το μικρόφωνο.
I didn't get about the age. How can you be not right and happy?
Great question. Can you give me an example of something that you've thought about in the past where you were just really committed to being right?
Well, I think that if you're not feeling that you're right, you cannot be happy either.
Do you have
And vice versa.
Yeah. See, that's really interesting. I'm so glad you said that. Because I actually believe that happiness should come first between right or wrong, and here's why. Everybody is right according to their view of the world, right?
Yeah.
Everybody is right. So we can be arguing about something. Have any of you ever been in an argument and you're like, how can she not see what I'm seeing? And she's over here going, how can this idiot not see what I'm seeing? Right? Because we've had so many things that have happened in our life, and the way that we view the world is so different, that to both of us, we're right. And so I'm not asking you to say you're not right. I'm just asking you to not get into the fight about the other person being wrong. And so what if you could just both be right without having an argument about it? I actually had a couple in a seminar that I was at one time. I was telling them about this whole idea of right and wrong, because if you get rid of the idea that somebody's wrong, all conflicts go away. Because all conflict is at the core, has to have somebody being wrong. But what if you did that? So they get in this couple, the next day, they got into an argument, like they usually do, and they were fighting for about 5 minutes, and one of them just said to the other, you know what? You're right, and I'm right. Can we just go to the seminar? And it just cleared. Because they weren't going to fight for who's right and who's wrong when their connection is more important than that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, not totally, but yes.
Okay. So if you have an example, I can help you out a lot more, and we can talk afterwards if you want. But in any given moment, whichever one you're willing to fight for, you're going to sacrifice the other one. And I just don't believe, and I know this is a tough concept for some people to get, I just don't believe that there's anything, in my opinion, in my world, there's nothing more important, especially my relationship with Sybil, that I'm willing to sacrifice our happiness for. And once you do it once, you'll be like, oh, I totally get what he meant, right? Do you guys understand what I'm saying? Like in an argument situation? So if you just say, what am I more committed to right now? Staying happy or being right and making them wrong, you'll feel the different choices. And I just invite you to step into happiness and you just watch how that other thing doesn't matter that much.
Yes, in terms that if you have to distinguish things between wrong and right, then it makes sense.
Exactly. That's the big key. So you're not fighting over I'm right and you're wrong. It's like, let's just be happy. Make sense?
Good.
Cool. Thank you for that question. That's a huge one.
Η ανάλυση μετά στο φουαγέ.
That's a
Κάποια
huge
άλλη
one.
ερώτηση. Σχέσεις όλοι είχαμε, θα έχουμε. Ορίστε. Γεια.
Yes.
Καλησπέρα. Το όνομά σου.
Hello, I'm Natasha.
Hello.
Just wanted to ask again about the argument. It's easy to say I don't argue when it's just a man and a woman, but when you are a family and you have children, and you have to decide, for example, for the education of your children, or the punishment, or the whatever of your children, and you don't have the same opinion with your husband or wife, don't you argue? Or you just let one of the two decide always?
Well, so it's a great question. That's one of the things that draw couples into these arguments, right? Is because you've got these values and you believe that certain things should be certain ways when you're raising kids and so forth. The question, and there's no right or wrong answer, but the question to ask yourself really is, what's the effect of the argument? I had a woman one time asked a very similar question. Her question was, how do I get my husband to stop picking his socks up off the floor? And I said, you do it. She didn't like that answer. But I said, why does he need to pick the socks up off the floor? And so she said, well, because then my son will have a clean home, and then we won't argue all the time. There won't be all this fighting, and then my son will realize that, you know, he can grow up and be in a house full of love. And I said, so that's what your arguing is accomplishing? You're arguing and fighting to teach your child love? That doesn't make sense. Are you following me? So you got to look at what's the effect of the argument. Now, you can have the conversation. Sybil and I definitely don't agree on everything. But it doesn't have to be an argument. You can have that conscious conversation. And you can have a civilized conversation without stepping over that line into anger. Because your kids lose that way. And anger is not going to solve anything.
Arguing can be conscious conversation. Fighting is having anger.
Yeah, so maybe I misunderstood what you're saying.
Yeah.
So I thought you were going like with the anger and the argument.
No, arguing means I have a different opinion.
Sure.
For example, if my child is going to do music or karate, for example. So I want to do my child to have music lessons, and
Yeah.
my husband wants to have, and we argue, but he has to do only one thing. So one thing must be decided. So
Yeah.
we argue. It doesn't have to be a fight.
I totally agree.
We disagree. So
Yeah.
somehow it has to be resolved.
And like you said, it's a conscious conversation. I don't know the answer to that, but there's got to be, like I don't know the answer for you.
So you finally argue, but somebody has to win, let's say, win.
See, that's where it gets tricky. Is that what if you could both leave the argument without either person winning or losing? Because if you and your husband say, why is it that you want our child to do this, and why is it that I want our child to do this? I bet both of you want the exact same thing for your children. You just see different paths to get there. Mm-hmm. And when you notice that you're actually both wanting the same thing, it's so much easier to find the compromise. I mean, there's no way to get rid of disagreement. But you can always do it in a conscious way with love without the win versus loss deal.
Okay.
Because I think if you're committed to one of you winning, I think your kids lose.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And the answer on a Monday might be different than the answer on a Tuesday. That's the beauty of relationships.
Okay.
But it's the conscious idea that you got to hold on to. Are you with me?
Yes, thank you.
Cool, absolutely.
Ωραία, ευχαριστούμε. Κάποια άλλη
Maybe one
ερώτηση?
more quick one.
Okay. Άλλη μία ερώτηση στα γρήγορα. Κάποιος για τη σχέση του, μία απορία, γενικότερα για τις σχέσεις. Εκεί. Βλέπω ένα χέρι εκεί, πίσω. Προχωράς. Ωραία, είσαι σε καλό δρόμο. Μια χαρά, ναι. Εκεί στα αριστερά σου, αριστερά. Το χέρι σου το ξανασηκώνεις λίγο για να σε δει. Α, οκ. Α, εκεί. Ωραία. Εντάξει. Καλησπέρα, το όνομά σου.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Faye, and
Faye.
I want to ask this: if someone is defending, how he can change that?
If your partner is being really defensive,
Or me?
or you're being really defensive, it's, I think Sean alluded to this, all of that is coming from anger, it's coming from fear, it's coming from those 5 A's not being met. So when somebody is really angry, if you talk to the piece of them that wants these things, that anger will fall. It will. But you've got to see them for their pain and what they're wanting rather than the anger. If you engage at them in the anger, then nothing gets accomplished. But this is the answer. These 5 A's right here, I think it's the answer to pretty much everything. Because the heart can't withstand communicating with affection and acknowledgement and appreciation. There's always something you can appreciate. So I think if it's the other person getting defensive, you speak to these lower levels. If it's you getting defensive, maybe you have the consciousness and awareness, this is what I'm after. And you step back and you don't make it about them because it's not their responsibility. Does that...
And if it is fear?
My thing with fear is you always got to challenge it. What are you actually afraid of? In relationships, most fear will come down to being abandoned, somebody leaving you, or you being alone. But you got to have clarity around what that fear is, and sometimes the fear will lead to a conversation. That's a powerful conversation. Sometimes the fear, if you challenge it and say, what am I really afraid of here? You'll realize it's ridiculous fear, and it'll just go away by you questioning it. But either one, it comes down to awareness. Does that help?
A little bit, but you're alone because of fear.
You're alone because of fear?
Yes.
I agree. Fear creates the feeling of loneliness. And people are holding on to their fear because they don't want to be alone. So what that means is most people are creating the very thing they're afraid of by trying to avoid it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And in reality, when you really poke at what does alone even mean, and you find out what that is for you, it'll probably dissolve. Especially when it's not up to that other person to make you not feel alone.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And so we should probably, let me,
Okay.
thank you, Katarina, I appreciate
Thank
you. Most of the time, the answer says, and I know this gets really challenging because we've got all these stories built up in our head and we've got all this history with people. Most of the time, the answer is going to be, get into a conversation and let's figure this thing out. Sometimes the conversation is just with yourself and all of it will go away. So hopefully you can implement, I'll tell you what, if you just implement one of these things, your relationships will change. And please don't think that just because your relationships have been a certain way in the past, that they have to be that way going forward. Because when you change in the relationship changes. Make sense? When you stop getting angry, they stop responding to your anger. So don't let the past dictate what you've got to do in the future. So I told you that my dad had pancreatic cancer a couple years ago. And it was one of the most challenging times of my life. And he lived his last 80 days with us in our home. And I remember one night, he was feeling really good after we finished eating dinner at a restaurant. And he as we're walking out to the parking lot, he stops on the curb and he says to my son, Exley, he's like, X, come on, buddy, let's jump. And Exley's looking at him like, this old man's crazy. But he says, come on, buddy, let's jump. He goes, 1, 2, and he jumps. I mean, it was more like a fall, you know. It wasn't really a jump. Because he had really bad knees, and most people would think, you know, oh, well, let me tell you what happened. He didn't land very well, turned, we all heard the break, and he broke his hip. Because he jumped off of, you know, a curb that's this big. And so, later on that night, I was so irritated at him. Because now it's another doctor's visit. It's more work for me. I've got to care for him a little bit more. And as I was getting irritated at my dad, I thought, whoa, 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 whoa. He had the guts to jump. You know, most people would be like, I'm 67 years old, I have bad knees, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be here, I can't jump. But my dad thought, I'm 67 years old, I got bad knees, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be here, I'm jumping. And he jumped. So what do you have in your life to jump for? What do you have in your life that's so important you're willing to fight for it? How many of you know right now you've got a little rumbling saying, you know what, I got to jump for this thing. Whether it's a relationship or something else in your life. But let me ask you this question. Would you rather jump and find out, or stay on the edge of the curb and never know? How many of you want to jump? You're willing to jump. You got to find that thing that you're willing to fight for. And speaking of relationships, I had a friend of mine recently that said, you know, I was telling her, you can't settle for your relationships. This is 90% of your happiness. You can't settle for your relationships. And she goes, oh, you know, that's just a fairy tale. And I said, you're damn right it's a fairy tale, and you fight for your fairy tales. Because how are they going to come true? If you doubt them first. So we all have something inside that's willing, that we are willing to fight for. We all have little boy dreams and little girl dreams that we are willing to fight for. And the answer, whenever we're going through bad stuff, the answer out of whatever you're going through is always in. Find that thing that you're willing to fight for. Find that thing that you're willing to jump for. And the last conversation I had with my dad, I said, Pops, how can I live your legacy when you're gone? And he said, Shawnee, just be who you can be, do what you can do, and live a good life. So profound. So that's what I want to leave you with today. Just be who you can be, fully naked, do what you can do with every ounce of it, you know, every ounce of your being, and just live. How about we live a better life, right? And for God's sake, whenever you get the chance, jump. Thank you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you.